Hello everyone, and welcome to the last video in our series called Using the English Curriculum to Plan Effectively. This is the sixth video, the last video in the series, and it deals with the concept of unit planning. Unit planning is something you do when you create a series of lessons that go together, that have a sense of cohesion. Those curriculum maps that we've been working on, they lend themselves to create units. You don't create single lessons every time you go in to teach. You create a series of linked lessons to get to a result at the end. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. As you know, the study guide is available in Toledo. Actually, because we're bridging week 1 and week 2 here, you should download the study guide in week 2. It has more specific questions and not do the material in the study guide for week 1. In addition, the first part of this video will help you finish the quiz from week 1. I have reset everybody's quizzes, so you have to take them again. So everybody gets a chance to get 100 on this week's quiz. And in addition, some questions will show up on the quiz in week 2. Okay, let's get started. To create a unit, we're going to use a specific 3-step approach. And actually, we're going to work backwards. Now, I was a teacher trainee myself a long time ago. And you know, when you create these lessons that you do for your stages, you know, probably most of you are not starting with the curriculum. I know I didn't. When you're first starting off making your lessons, you're more concerned about what does the course book say and things like that, and making your mentor happy. The last thing on your mind is starting with the curriculum. But as we've seen, this is where we should always start. So in this first step of the process, we have to identify the desired results. And those desired results are the objectives that come from the curriculum and the standards. So for each lesson that or each unit that we design, what are those final measurable results? And the key word here too is measurable. And that ties into the second step, which is to determine the acceptable evidence. How are you going to measure that your students have achieved the results that you want? What evidence are you going to use? Here in our language curriculum, we've already learned that you have to use something called a language task. But also you might use quizzes or small tests or other types of formative assessment to determine the acceptable evidence as you move through this linked series of lessons or a unit. And then finally, once you've done those 2 steps, you have to then plan the learning experiences. So planning that actual lesson comes at the very, very end. And why is that? Well, when you identify those results, you have to make sure that those results show up in the acceptable evidence. Is every piece of assessment that you're going to do, does it measure one or more of the desired results that you've indicated in the first step? And also, when you're planning your learning experiences, does each and every learning experience go back to one or more of the desired results? This is what I mean by the concept of linked. These 3 steps are interlinked. That is, what you identify in the first step has to be linked in the second and has to be linked in the third. The language task that you're going to design in the acceptable evidence piece, you must have activities that's going to help the student or scaffold their learning so that they can do that language task. This whole process, by the way, is called Understanding by Design, and it was researched by 2 American educators, Grant Wiggins and Jay McTee. There is a PDF document in Toledo that gives you the Understanding by Design in a nutshell. It has a little bit more information about each one of these 3 steps in each one of the pages of the template that we're going to see in just a minute. So make sure you download that document and you review it. All right, for this piece, we're going to actually work with a template. Um, I don't want you to get too nervous here, okay? You've been working with a template for your lesson plan, and I know that it can be daunting and it can be a pain in the butt. And this template, probably you're going to think is a pain in the butt too, but the template is designed to help you understand the process. Do I actually think that when you leave me at the end of the year, that you're actually going to go into a situation and use this template? Probably not. You're going to use whatever templates your school already uses. If they don't, you may use some variation of this template, or you may use the template itself. Again, it's designed to help you. You're beginning teachers. You don't have the experience to truly design beautiful linked units right from the start. Even as an experienced teacher, I still, when I'm working with new material, I use some sort of template to help guide the steps, and then make adjustments when I need to make sure that I'm putting in everything that I'm doing. And that's what this template is designed to do. So please, please, please don't have a heart attack when you see the template, okay? All right, let's take a look. The first page deals with the desired results. And it's going to look something like this. It has 4 pieces to it. The goals, transfer, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, meaning, which is broken into understandings and essential questions, and then acquisition, which you have in the past been calling the cognitive objectives. And we're going to divide this into 2 areas: declarative knowledge, which is just knowledge, and procedural knowledge, which is the skills. The second page deals with the evidence. We're not going to concern ourselves with it this week yet. We're going to go through the whole topic of assessment first, then we're going to come back to this page. So you're not going to have to worry about this page, but in terms of this page, there's a couple things to keep in mind. This is where we start the linking. The first column is called code, and those those letters and numbers refer back to the things that I indicated on the first page. Notice all the T's and E's and S's and K's and U's. Those are all linked then here. When I design my assessments, I have to make sure that each and every one of my transfer ideas, my understandings, my essential questions, my knowledge, and my skills are somewhere represented in the evidence area. If I say I'm going to teach to it, then I have to be able to measure it and assess it. The second column deals with the criteria. It gets you to think about what criteria are going to use to grade these tasks, and that's very important. Then the language task or tasks themselves, what are those end products going to be? And it's important that you design them now before you start the lesson so that you can scaffold the learning events to help the students do better on these performance tasks. And then what other evidence might be? What other formative evidence might you be collecting here? And we'll talk more about that in our next video, which is on formative assessment. The stage 3 document, you're going to do a little bit of work with it this week in terms of, again, the coding column, but we're not going to deal with making it just yet. You've been making lessons, so I'm very confident that you can make lessons. You've gotten this far. The difference here is 2 things. One, we have to think about pre-assessment or diagnostic testing. We have to be able to make sure that the students have the prior knowledge that we think they have. And if they don't, then we have to teach that information a little bit harder. If they do have that information, that means that maybe we can cover some things instead of going into deeper understandings. For example, in the baseball stuff we were doing, I could have given you the vocabulary worksheet first and said, label everything you know. That would have been a type of pre-assessment. That would have been a type of diagnostic view to see what words do you already know, then I don't need to spend as much time on them. And then I would adjust my activities as based on your vocabulary quiz. So that's important. You have to have an element of pre-assessment or diagnostic in a learning plan. In addition, let me just say one more thing about that. I often hear teacher trainees like yourself say things like, but they should know that. I don't want you to say that. I want you to be sure that they know that. And the way that you're sure that they know that is to give some sort of pre-assessment. Then the learning events. You're not creating individual lesson plans here. That comes later. What you're doing is you're creating sort of an outline. And the reason you're creating an outline is to make sure that each one of these activities goes back to a desired result that you have already indicated on the first page of the template. So every learning activity must link back to one or more of these. That's critical. That's absolutely critical, or else your unit is not going to be effective. So we're going to use this throughout the semester. This is going to be something you do as well. It has to go into your portfolio. But you're using it for me. So I don't want you to get all worked up that this is something you have to necessarily do. Although when you do your stage in the second semester, I would like you to use some sort of template, some sort of plan to show how your lessons link together. Okay, you're going to get the curriculum map or the yard plan from your mentor, and then you're going to design a series of lessons, and I'm assuming that some of those lessons are going to link together. They should link together. You're there for a longer period of time. We'd like to see that overall plan. Have you thought about that overall plan before you start making those individual lessons? All right, we're going to take a look at the stage 1 and stage 2 a little bit more closely here. So first, beginning with the desired results. Now, a couple things are linked directly to the curriculum map. If you go back to your curriculum map, you've already identified the objectives and the essential question. That is, if you're using a template similar to the one that I've been showing you. This is where you start. You go back to that curriculum map, you take this information, and you move it right over to the unit template plan, and that helps you to get started. And again, the curriculum map can be very, very useful here. You can be going back and forth between the unit plan template and the curriculum map to see how things match together. The next section deals with the concept of transfer. You've been dealing with the concept of transfer right from the start of designing your lesson. You're supposed to design a lesson that has a transfer activity at the end. That's one use of transfer. We're going to talk about other uses of transfer as well. Transfer can be in our lessons in the beginning, they can be at the end, and they certainly have to be in our assessment. The curriculum specifically points out that our assessments must have a transfer notion to them. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, these are 3 definitions for transfer. They're pretty similar, but they lead to the same concept. The idea is that students take knowledge they already have. And by already have, I mean if you teach them something new, then hopefully they've mastered it in that lesson, and by the time they do that last activity, they already have that knowledge. They take that knowledge that you've taught them in a specific contextual, integrated situation, and they use it in a similar or different integrated contextual situation. That's key. Example. I'm sure you've heard examples like this before. First example, tying your shoes. You all learned to tie your shoes, correct? I hope you're all nodding your heads. Well, yeah, so did I too. Do you remember when you were tying your shoes? You probably learned a little rhyme or some sort of memory device to help you make sure that you cross and you form the bows, and then you bring them on, you loop them under each other, and such and such and such. And then you practice that over and over and over and over and over again until it became automatic. One type of transfer is the type of transfer where you practice it over and over and over and over and over again until it becomes automatic. The other type of transfer that would be involved there is you learned on, a little kid's shoe, a toddler's shoe, Now you're big boys and girls, so you're wearing big boys and girls shoes. But tying the laces is exactly the same. That's an example of transfer. It's a similar situation. Okay, but think about people now guys who have to tie a tie. There are elements of tying a tie that go along with tying your laces, or girls tying a bow with your scarf or on your blouse. You could have used the knowledge you gained from tying your shoelaces to actually effectively tie your blouse together with a bow at the top, or tie your scarf in a bow. That doesn't matter. That is another example of transfer. Okay. Another example. Let's say you learn to play the piano. Okay, you learn to play the piano, you learn to work your fingers, spread your fingers to hit all the keys, work your hands sometimes in tandem, work them in different directions. You also learned the concept of musical notes. You probably learned how to read basic sheet music. So let's say, okay, you've learned the piano, and at least you've practiced the piano enough. You want to move on to a different instrument. You decide to go to the guitar. Okay, so the question becomes, can I take knowledge that I gained from learning the piano and use it to help me learn to play the guitar? And the answer is yes, I can. I should be able to. The concept of the notes, reading sheet music, maybe the concept of my hands not working in tandem, I can take that with me. Okay, those are examples of transfer. Now, there are three broad categories of transfer that we're going to take a look at and see how they affect our lesson. The first is positive versus negative. For example, the fact that you learn to play the piano and you learn to recognize notes and you learn sheet music, that will positively or enhance your learning of the guitar. Well, but on the other hand, maybe the way you move your hands and the way you spread your fingers out, that might have a negative effect on you playing the guitar, where your fingers don't spread out as much. That may undermine the process. So the positive versus negative. Near versus far. Contexts that are similar, near. Contexts that seem remote to one another, but yet they are linked. We sometimes just don't see it. So if I learn to play the piano, let's go back to the shoes. I learned to tie my shoes on little kids' shoes, but then I learned to tie shoes for teenagers. Then I tie shoes for adults, so on, so on. Those are near situations. That's near transfer. I'm transferring what I learned on that small shoe with those small laces to bigger shoes. A far might be the concept of taking some of that information and applying it to tying a tie for a guy, or a bow on your blouse, or a scarf for anyone. Those are far. We don't necessarily think that they're linked, but yet some of the concepts are the same. The piano. So piano to guitar. That's probably a far situation. They don't seem to be linked to one another, but yet we could use them. But then if I went from guitar to violin, that would be a near situation. So it can work in multiple ways. Low road versus high road. Low road. Remember when we talked about tying your shoes? You repeated it and repeated it and repeated it and repeated it until it became just part of your nature. Now you don't even think about it. That's low road transfer. It becomes reflexive. You keep doing something until it's an automatic behavior. But high road transfer means that you have to explore something and maybe take it apart and look at all the pieces to bring in transfer from different ideas, from different concepts, and apply them to this. That's high road. In English, we do a lot of low road, but the thing is we need to move sometimes to the high road for our students to be successful as well. So where do we see these, positive and negative, in our lessons? We need to activate prior knowledge. That can have a positive, but yet a negative effect. For example, positive, you're going to start teaching the present simple. And you have to do the spelling changes in the third person singular for some verbs. Your students already know the spelling changes for plural nouns, the Y to I, add ES, whatever the case may be. You can take that information from noun plurals and apply it to verbs in the present simple and the third person singular. The rules are similar. That's a positive. Negative, for example, students often Once they seem to learn the past simple, the addition of the ed without very little problem, because it can actually, as a positive, transfer from Dutch. They're all one form, and you're adding. In Dutch, you add two different endings, but it's usually the de or the te, and then add the n for the plural. In English, you're adding an ed, so it even has some similar letters in there. But then we get to the irregulars. And sometimes the students seem to unlearn what they've learned about the regulars when they learn the irregulars. Or they do something like wented. They take the irregular form and add the ed. There's a negative interference there. We have to be aware that those things are going to happen sometimes for students. We have to find ways around it. Maybe we decide to teach the irregular past simples before we teach the regular. That makes more sense sometimes because most of the common verbs we use in everyday language are irregular. So start with those first, let the students learn them, then go to the regular. There's no negative interference there. They're two different things. Near and far, we use them at evaluation and assessment. Sometimes you do near at the end of a lesson. That's what you've been doing. Or you do it with the formative assessment that you're doing throughout a lesson. Far often will occur in summative assessment or in a language task, that taaltak at the end. So the situation seems a little bit different. And sometimes that's hard to do for certain things we do. But you have to look to see, can I make it as remote as possible, but can they still be successful? The low road deals with the concept of scaffolding. We have to do things that scaffold the learning. Sometimes it's a rote memorization. Sometimes it's drilling. Sometimes it's other things. High road. Sometimes we need to give students a problem and let them take it apart and look at all the things that they need to bring in from the other areas and do that. So again, scaffolding plays a big, big role in the process of transfer. So you need to write transfer goals here, and they should, because they should be, they should have a positive effect. They should be more far than near, and they should try to lead up the high road instead of down the low road. Understanding. What are the big understandings that the students need to be successful in this set of units that you're creating? This concept here, you have to, again, it's like, what is the moral of the story type of thing? These aren't the facts. We're going to do those later. These are the understanding. The fact that reviews have a specific structure and use collocations that express positive, negative, and neutral points of view. That's a broad statement. That's an understanding. American baseball is a cultural phenomenon that is used metaphorically in various conversations and writing. They need to understand that, because when they're reading things from American English, baseball might trickle into it. Okay? So those things, and these are something you have to work on. These are really probably the hardest of all of them to write. Sometimes it's better to write the understandings after you have written everything else. The knowledge and the skills. Again, declarative knowledge is the pure knowledge. These are the things the students will know. And I know that you haven't necessarily used the word know or will know. Again, this is just a template for class. Don't get bothered by it. But the concept is students do need to know things. They need to know the rules of baseball. They need to know the basic association. They need to know how to form the regular past simple. They need to know when to use the past simple. That's knowledge. What's really important here, guys, is this individual knowledge should always be assessed formatively. Holistically together, this goes into the language task or language tasks. You should not be making an exam at the end of a period that deals with individually testing these things. That's not the way to do it. We'll look at some ways that we can do it so it's more successful. Procedural knowledge refers to skills. refers to the reading, the listening, the writing, the speaking, and the spoken interaction. What are they going to do on those skill level? It's nicely divided for us. In other fields, it's not so easily divided. You have to work at it a little bit. You've been calling all of this a cognitive, which is fine, which is exactly what they are. But cognitive is divided into two additional categories, which is declarative and procedural, which is what we're looking at. So it's really separating it out. And it's important. How I teach knowledge is different than how I teach skills. It should be different. All right, there's a little task for you in Toledo under week 2. It's called It's called Unit Planning, Task 1. What you need to do, guys, is you're going to be given a stage 1 page, but the transfer, understandings, knowledge, and skills are empty. On the second page, you have a list of what should go there. Your objective is to take this list and put them in the right spot. Okay, just can you identify which are more understandings and which are more knowledge, which are more skills, which sound like transfer? Okay, this is for, I think I took it from the curriculum map for the first grade, the second topic, which is sharing and giving personal information. So it's an easy enough topic for you. Because the established goals and the essential questions come from the curriculum map, they're already there for you. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, do this, check it. Please bring it to class with you on Thursday, and the answers will appear Wednesday after 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, now let's take a look at the learning plan real quickly. So we've talked about this concept of pre-assessment. Why do we pre-assess? I talked a little bit about this. The concept that we need to know what students' prior knowledge is, what their background information is, and we need to know if there are any misconceptions we're going to have to deal with. Again, the purpose is this really helps you to differentiate your instruction. It really helps you to determine how far or close you need to stay to your plan. Can you move beyond it? Can you differentiate it in such a way that students are working in groups and moving at different rates? That's all the concept of differentiation we're going to be taking a look at. It might help you make groups. For example, if you find out that you've got a bunch of students that don't know it, but a bunch of students that do know it, then you want to make groups where these students are either working, some are in a group, you have some that know and some that don't know, so they can help each other? Or are you going to differentiate in such a way that the group that knows is going to move farther and the group that doesn't know is going to work a little harder to get the basic information? And of course, they can be formal, like a test, something coming from a publisher, a course book, or something much more informal, like just a little individual whiteboard activity, or a thumbs up, thumbs down, like we did the other day in class. So you have to determine, how will the students be pre-assessed? Okay. Then you have the learning plan itself. You have this diagram in your study guide as well. It's just something to help you keep in mind the things that should be in this outline of the lessons. Where are we going? And why and what is expected? That's the concept that we always need to go back to, the desired results. What's your hook going to be, and how is that going to hold your students' interest? How can we equip our students for expected performances? That is, how am I going to scaffold my learning activities that will help my students be successful in the performance task or the language task? And this is critical, guys. Our job is not to trip students up. Our job is to teach them how to be successful. We want all our students to pass. That should always be your goal. It always is my goal. How will we help students rethink and revise when necessary? So at what points are we going to check, do some concept checking, do some formative assessment to make sure? And if students are having a problem, how am I going to give them feedback? Very, very important. Will the students self-evaluate, and how? Students should always be reflecting on their learning process. We're going to take a look at a couple formative assessment tools that will help us with that. How are we going to tailor our learning to the various needs, interests, and styles of our students? This is the concept of differentiation. How are we going to change things up so that the faster students are not bored and the slower students are not lost? It's critical, guys. If you don't do it, you're going to lose half your audience. And how will I organize and sequence the learning? What is the best way to do this? And again, if you're looking at all these lessons holistically or in an overview, then it's easier to see how things can be linked, and maybe you change things around. This is what I've said to you in the last video. The course book, just because the course book's written in one way, doesn't mean you have to do those exercises in that way. Looking at it in an overview allows you to move exercises, change exercises. All you're telling students to do is flip different pages. Not a big deal, or it shouldn't be. The other thing to keep in mind is that all your learning events have to be matched back to your desired results. This is key. If you are doing a learning event and it does not have a matching desired result, then one of two things is going on here. A, the learning event is useless for this lesson, or B, you're missing something in the desired results. You have to make that decision. Again, this holistic overview allows you to see that. You don't see that if you're just making individual lessons one at a time. So again, you have another task. It's a little task. Basically, what you need to do here is you're going to be given the learning plan for the same unit that you had for the step 1 desired results. You take the information from the desired result, which you now have a corrected version of, and then before you come to class on Thursday, please try to match the corrected version, or your corrected version, or the correct version in Toledo, to try to match each one of those desired results to one of these learning activities. Is something missing? That's going to be the question we're going to answer. Again, bring this with you, please, on Thursday. And we're going to do some working class together with another one of these. You're just going to practice it a little bit more, okay? So, again, don't worry. We'll get through this, okay? All right, that is the end of this video, the end of this whole topic, but this is a topic we're exploring for the whole semester. So make sure that you come back to these videos whenever you need additional information. And I will see you shortly in the video for week 2's topic, the first video, which is assessment. And there is only one video associated with assessment this week. And then next week, we're going to look at assessment on two different ways. So there'll be 2 videos, at least 2 videos. Okay, so I will see you in the next video. Thanks.